Okay, welcome everybody. We'll do some sound checks real quick. I can test the performance of the link so far. It's looking good so far. Okay. 0.2% frames missed so far. We'll see how that continues, if it continues. Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning, good welcome. I hope you had a good week. Actually, I hope you've had 2 good weeks because I was out last week. And lo siento. Okay, so waiting for everybody to see me in the room, waiting for me to see some response from the crowd, the peanut gallery as it were. I think I've got everything as loud as I can get it. Let's do some sound checks, folks. Oh, I guess they can see me. They're already talking about my man bun's gone. No, I just don't have it up right now. It's getting longer. Soon I'll be able to cut it off and donate it. Beautiful. I've been threatening to donate it for a long time, but it's just now getting to the point where I can. Okay, so Aleph. Okay, beautiful. So welcome everybody. We're so happy you're with us. So we kind of finished off 2 weeks ago. We covered some of Noah. We covered some of Noah in the previous weeks, 2 weeks ago, recording. And today we're going to start off with just a little bit after the flood, and we're going to pick it up in Genesis chapter 9. And we're going to carry through today's portion of Lech Lecha. So we'll cover both Noah, and Lech Lecha today, excuse me. Oh my goodness, my English and my Spanish words just kind of flow out together sometimes. And I get all of them wrong, so it's even more fun. Okay, so today we're going to start off with chapter 9. Now the reason we're starting off in chapter 9, and by the way, I called this recording Let There Be Flight. The first for Bereshit, for the first portion of the cycle, I called it Let There Be Light because that was the first one there. Well, the reason I called this one Let There Be Flight is because Noah leaves where he's at. Those in the Tower of Bavel leave where they're at. Abraham leaves where he's at several times. He goes from Ur and the Chaldees to Haran, from Haran to Canaan, from Canaan down to Egypt, from Egypt back to Canaan. So, a lot of flight going on. And so that's why I'm calling it Let There Be Flight. So, anyhow, we're going to start off today talking about the first covenant with the, in the first post-apocalyptic time. We talked a couple weeks ago about we have archaeological record that doesn't really fit a flood that happened 5,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago. We just don't have anything in the archaeological record globally that supports that. I remember back in a day when I was wandering in my religious journeys and I was in Christianity. We were there for 30 years. We believed a lot of stuff that I realized today was not only unreasonable, illogical, but downright not within the context of what we see within the archaeological record. And back then I used to say, well, it was because, science is trying to hide God. No, it's because it doesn't make sense. That's why. We have archaeological record that shows, and we talked about it a couple weeks ago, things about the Clovis event. There's speculation about what caused it, but it was 12,000 years. We know. I mean, that we have an archaeological record that gives us very, very reasonable expectation that 12,000 is correct. It's not like science trying to hide something. I mean, there's evidence there. We see evidence in the record that fits a timeline in the soil. So, we can look back that far. Well, we don't see a global flood that happens, after that, 12,000 years to 4,500 years ago. We just don't see that kind of archaeological record. And, so what does this mean? What was the flood about? Don't know. It could have been regional. It could have been global. It could have been just the example given by humanity at that time to explain something that they saw. I mean, listen, if the pyramids were built more than 4,500 years ago, then, they would have some kind of story to explain where they came from. I mean, we have those stories today, don't we? The Goa'uld use them as landing platforms, or, the aliens used them as whatever, or the humans used them as whatever, or the Nephilim. I mean, we have all kinds of stories about where they came from. So that's not new for our era. They've had stories to explain things that they couldn't understand for a long time. You go to, there's the giant's marbles. There's the giant footsteps. There's all kinds of things across the world that are archaeological finds that are either naturally occurring or man-made. Naturally occurring, like boulders stacked on top of boulders that look like they're just there in a very precarious situation. How could they have been sat there? How could the erosion have cut out this perfect form? Blah, 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 blah. You go to certain Central American sites or South American sites, and you see brickwork or stonework, that is very, very finite in its construction. Even to the point where, thousands and thousands of years later, it's stable enough for us to build on today and be as strong as any current building site. So there's a lot of things that we don't understand that came before us, and we come up with reasons, different conspiracy theories or non-conspiratorial in theory, whatever. And that, we just don't know. So we come up with ideas. And it's very, very possible that the flood and the Tower of Bavel, that these are all examples of that. It is reasonable in my mind to assume that they are examples of how humanity was trying to explain certain things. In this section of the text, we see the rainbow. The rainbow is something that, Zeus is responsible for. It's another thing that, that different gods are responsible for. Sometimes it's a sign of war. Sometimes it's used for meteorological assessments. For example, I don't know if it's Akkadian or maybe Egyptian. It might be Egyptian, where if the rainbow is in the east, it's rain. If it's in the north, it's catastrophe. If it's in the south, it's flooding. So those are types of examples of meteorological, significance of the rainbow. So, there's been lots and lots of things that have been said about different aspects we see in the Torah or in the book of Genesis in particular that may actually be just folklore trying to explain something that they see. Does that mean it's not relevant? It's relevant from the perspective that it helps us understand that they were no different then than we are. I mean, we still come up with ideas about why things are the way they are. But as far as its relevance to the storyline, I really don't think so. There are a few things that are relevant in the first, 10 chapters or so of Genesis. And one of them, I believe, is found right here in Genesis chapter 9. And relevant from the perspective that it says, "Now God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Bear fruit and be many, and fill the earth. Fear of you and dread of you shall be upon all the wild life of the earth, and upon all the fowl of the heavens, all that crawl upon the soil, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they have been given." Okay, so not really much of a commandment there. It just says this is what's going to happen with the animals. They're going to now, they're not going to be your buddies anymore. Now it says all things crawling about that live, for you they shall be for eating. As with the green plants, I now give you all. However, the flesh with its blood, with its life, its blood, you are not to eat. So, the very first commandment could be seen as bear fruit and be many. But that's really not a commandment so far. It's more like a may you be filled with many seed, or may you have much seed. It's almost a blessing, as it says in verse 1. And now God blessed Noah and said, bear fruit. Well, it reads as a commandment in English, but it very well could have been in Hebrew, saying unto him that you will bear fruit, and you will be many, and you will fill the earth. Because in the storyline, he's the only people that are alive. Fear of you and dread of you shall be on the wildlife. Okay, all things that crawl about. This is the first commandment. They shall be for you for eating. I give you all, however, do not eat its blood. The first commandment is you can eat anything now. Now, people will say, oh, no, because the Torah was given all the way back. The Torah was given all the way back in Adam. Adam had God's Torah. Well, in a manner of speaking, yes. The manner of speaking is that Torah means instruction. So Adam was given instruction. So, yes, he had Torah. But did he have the Torah that we were given in the days of Moses, which really begins our storyline? Begins the heart of our storyline. Today we'll be working with the beginnings of that storyline when we get to Abraham. But as it stands right here, this is Torah as well. And the Torah here says you can eat anything you want. Pigs, ostrich, camel hump. If you're into Chinese food. No, I'm kidding. That's a movie, from a movie. But it says you're not to eat the blood. You can eat anything you want, anything that crawls about. All things crawling about that live, they shall be for you for food, for eating. As with the green plants, all green plants, for eating, I now give you all flesh. However, don't eat the blood. If you eat the blood, I will demand satisfaction. From all the animals, I will demand it. From all humankind, I will demand it. From every man regarding his brother, demanding satisfaction for human life. Now, whoever now sheds human blood, for that human blood shall his blood be shed, for in God's image he made mankind, or humankind. As for you, bear fruit and be many, swarm on the earth, and become many on it. So what are the commandments that we have here in the first general Torah given to, within the context, all humanity? What is it? Eat anything that moves. Don't eat the blood. If you eat the blood, I will demand satisfaction of you. Doesn't say how. Don't shed human blood. Where's my thing? There it is. Where does it say, do not eat the blood? Do not eat blood. You are not to eat. Period. Whoever sheds human blood, that human shall shed his blood. So we have several bits of information here that tell us that what we're dealing with is two commands. Eat all things. Don't eat the blood. Don't shed human blood. Those are the two primary commands listed here. Now, there's one more that's given here in just a few moments. We'll scroll down to it real quick, and then we'll come back. I will bless those who bless you. This is in Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse or damn. And all the clans of the soil will be find blessing through you. So this is the third or fourth, depending on how you count it, commandment that is given to all humanity. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Back here in chapter 9, we see you can eat anything you want. Don't eat the blood. It'll be required of you if you eat the blood, and don't shed human blood, whether you're animal or human. It'll be required of you. So, this is the commandment given to all humanity. Again, in context, all humanity. And what is it that is said? Number one, I shall require it of you. I will demand satisfaction. Now, what does that mean? I will demand satisfaction. Well, that means there's going to be some penalty. Where is the mechanism for atonement? There isn't one. Oh, but Jeff, the Ten Commandments, you know, the story of Jesus is hidden in the text. I mean, that's all. They knew that. They just knew that. I have stopped treating the text like that. I try to treat the text as much as I can. I'm not perfect at it, but I try to treat the text as much as I can in a contextual manner. It's called a grammatical historical approach. And in a grammatical or a contextual historical approach, we see within this context, within this section of text, there is no mechanism for atonement. None. One can assume that unintentional eating of blood would be treated differently than intentional eating of blood. That's an assumption. But the assumption seems reasonable because within the Torah that God gave to Moses to give to Israel, there are also allowances for intentional versus unintentional. So if there are allowances within that covenant, then within this covenant, I would assume that allowance would be the same. Not because it's implied in the text, because it's not. It just says, I will demand satisfaction. So two things are possible here. Number one, if you eat blood, God's going to cause some type of loss to come to you. And there's no way to get around it. No forgiveness, no repentance, no atonement, no nothing. If you do it, you're going to receive some type of response. And the same with the shedding of human blood. For that human shall his blood be shed. So no mechanism for atonement, no mechanism for intentional or unintentional sins. It is you are going to die or you're going to lose blood if you shed blood. If you eat blood, you're going to receive something from God's hand. That's it. No mechanism for atonement, no mechanism for forgiveness. It's just you do it, you're going to get response. You know, cause and effect, without any buffering, without any adjustment. Cause and effect. Period. That's what the text says. I assume that intentional versus unintentional would also be applicable here, because that seems to be a mechanism of judging, as opposed to mechanisms for atonement that were given specifically to Israel. There is no mechanism for atonement here. I don't assume there would be a mechanism for atonement because there's none mentioned. However, I also assume, to show my imbalanced balance, that the ideology or the mechanisms by which God judges would include intentional versus unintentional. However, it doesn't say that. All it says is if you eat blood, something's going to happen. If you take blood, something's going to happen. Not take as in intravenous as far as blood transfusions. I mean as far as shedding blood. Someone could argue that, you know, when you talk about transfusions and things like that, that there could be an issue here. But it doesn't cover that, so it's just an assumption. However, in my mind, this is specifically speaking of death. Whoever sheds human blood. And that seems to be an indication of murder or some type of death resulting from the loss of blood, as opposed to somebody donating blood. I don't believe that's what's being addressed here, but that's just me. So he establishes this covenant. What is the covenant? Well, it's not these commands. These commands aren't part of the covenant. The covenant is, I set my bow in the clouds, and my serve as a sign of the covenant between me and you. It shall be when the cloud of the earth with clouds and the bow is seen, that I will call to mind my covenant that is between me and you. All flesh, never again shall the waters become a deluge to bring all flesh to ruin. That's the covenant. So we say the Noahic covenant has nothing to do with the laws, the 2 or 3 laws that are listed at the beginning of chapter 9. It is God won't flood the earth with a deluge any longer. So that's all that is. So when we talk about, within Judaism, I'm a big fan of Judaism. I do not believe it is an automatic extension of Israel in this time. I believe it's a religion. I believe it's a community of people who want to follow the God of Moses, but they have their own trappings and their own additions. Christianity has no intention of following the God of Moses. They have their own God. They want to apply it backwards and try to retrofit, but it just doesn't retrofit. There's no context in the Christian doctrine that fits within the context that are within the Torah. If you have any complications accepting that information, then I'd suggest you go back and watch some of the other videos where I explain why there is no contextual relevance between the New Testament and the Torah. New Testament brings about heaven and hell, not in the Torah. New Testament brings about eternal damnation or eternal life, not in the Torah. It brings about the sin of all humanity can be traced back to either the breaking of the 10 Commandments or even the Garden of Eden itself, not in the Torah. The very foundational precepts of Christianity themselves are extra contextual. They are not part of the contextuality of the Torah, completely and utterly unrelated. Now, many of you who have listened to me for some time, you understand what I'm saying. You may not agree with me, but you understand what I'm saying. Some of you may not have that insight yet, and you might think I'm just dissing Christianity. No, I'm not dissing Christianity. It's just one of the other religions, just like Judaism, who have their faults. The difference is, at least Judaism's contexts are relatively stable within the context of Torah. Christianity's contexts are virtually unfound within Torah. And the other thing about both religions in this example, neither of them accept Scripture as its final source. Specifically when you get to things like Ezekiel chapter 10, when God left the temple, or when Jeremiah and the other prophets pronounce that Israel is going to be leaving and they're not coming back soon. And both religions, but actually all three, including Islam, all three refer to the temple that was about during the days of Jesus, that was an established, authorized temple. It was not. The texts do not allow for it. The texts actually speak opposite to that. And if you haven't heard those discussions before, go back and watch some of the other videos, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so pressing onward. How are we doing on time? Looks like the network link is doing good. Okay, so real quick, I want to stop in chapter 10, talk about the children of Seth, or Shem, excuse me. And it says, the father of all the sons of Eber, Ivri, Eber, Hebrew. This is where you see the first version of the word of Hebrew, Eber. And that is where Hebrew comes from. It does not mean crossed over. It means crossed over to Christians, because there's a doctrine associated with it. But in reality, Eber, Ivri, they are all functions of a group of people that followed Eber. And when Abraham is called an Ivrit, it's because he came speaking of the same God, assumingly, as Eber. Ivri. Okay, so pressing on. Oh, and one of the other things I would say is it looks like Shem, they moved towards the mountain country of the east. So when you talk about the mountain country of the east, if we're talking about Noah, these guys living somewhere in the on the west side of the what we'd call the Saudi, Iraq, Iran, that entire plain. There are mountains that surround it, and that entire plain there is where the Euphrates and the Tigris and these other rivers were known, or at least today some of them are still known to be. So if a regional flood happened, and if these guys did land in Ararat, which today we think is in Turkey, then that's the western side of this giant bowl or plain of the Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Saudi, all the way down into where Yemen and so forth are. And that this entire area would be considered the land of Abraham. Now, and it looks like based upon those assumptions of mine that Shem went to somewhere towards Iran. It looks like from there we see Abraham. Now, I'm going to skip over Babel only because, again, one of the stories, it seems to be where all humanity has built a giant city somewhere in this plain, maybe up towards the mouth of the Euphrates, maybe somewhere near where we call Nineveh, excuse me. And maybe in some of those areas, we just don't know. But regardless, there is nothing in the archaeological record that identifies that all of humanity was in a single place at this point in time. Because we have archaeological records that go back even longer than what this would have been 4,000 years ago. And, you know, again, the Clovis event. The Clovis event shows human activity in areas of the world that are far outside of this. So again, is this mythological? Is this real? I don't know. But ultimately, it doesn't match anything within our archaeological record, and one would assume that it would. I assume that this should be able to be found in the archaeological record in order for it to be true, because we're only talking 4,500 years ago. It should be something that we could see easily, and it's not. So, pressing on. Finally, we get to the opening passages of the relative portions of our text. And the reason I say that is because now we're dealing with a specific person, and this specific person whom we think lived. We don't have anybody that has any coinage for Abraham. I mean, Abraham didn't mint his own coins per se, so we don't know how much of this is 100% accurate. However, we do have covenants that begin here which set the tone for later. Because of that, I am taking the approach that Abraham, as a general rule, is not only a historical figure, a factual figure, but also represents the beginning of the covenant that God begins to build, which ultimately results in Israel. Now, the other part of the story, the other part of the reason I call this the opening of our storyline is because Christianity as well as Islam also refer to this section, or this is the beginning of the relevant portion of the Bible. And it begins with Terah, who is actually the father of Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Eventually, they're going to move up to Haran. Haran dies. Haran is actually Lot's dad. And we see that all these things happen, and finally, we have a message from God. It says, Sarah was barren, had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot his son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and they set out from Ur of Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. But when they got as far as Haran, they settled there, assumingly because Haran dies. And later, and the days of Terah were 5 years and 200 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, Yehovah said to Avram, go forth from your land, from your kindred, from your father's house, and I will take you or send you to a land that you will see. And I will make a great nation of you. So where is it that Abraham is called by God from? Well, he's called from Haran. He's from Ur of the Chaldees, but he wasn't called in Ur of the Chaldees. He was called in Haran. And Yehovah said, Yehovah said, I will make a great nation of you. I will give you blessing and will make your name great. Be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And all the clans of the soil will find blessing through you. Now, all the clans of the soil. Where am I at? Okay, this word here is adma. We've talked about this before, and this is the reason I wanted to go through this real quick. Adma is clay, is soil, and is generally referring to those who dwell upon dry land. And all the families of the lands of the earth will be blessed. So this is global. If, and that's the reason I went through this exercise, if this were Eretz, then it could be talking about global, or it could be talking about only the land that God was giving to Abraham, and that only those families on that land would be blessed. But even with Adma, you can see that one of the choices here is land, soil, country, earth, ground, husbandman or husbandry, land. So even Adma refers to land. So does this section of text mean that all the clans on the earth, or all the clans in the land that I give you? I will make a great nation of you. You be a blessing. Be a blessing. Those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I'll curse. And all the clans of the soil will find blessing through you. So which one is it? Is it just the regional soil that he's talking about, or the global soil? Personally, I believe this is globally. But how are the clans of the earth going to be blessed through you? Well, that's where we go back to where I was at a second ago. Zechariah. In Zechariah, we see in chapter 14, and we scroll down, and it says, it will happen that everyone, let me see if I've got, yeah, there we are. It will have all that are left from all the nations that came up against Jerusalem. This at some point in time, be after Zechariah's day. It says, and it shall be all who are left of all the nations which came up against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to bow themselves to the King, Yehovah of hosts, and to celebrate the festival of Sukkot. And it shall be if any one of the clans of the earth, well, let's look at that. Clans of the earth. By the way, do not use Strong's as your mechanism of studying Scripture. That is not how you do that. Strong's is nothing more than a dictionary that identifies root words or root forms of the words, and it is nothing more than just a concordance. Use Brown Driver Briggs, and if you have the money, use Halot, Halot. But I prefer Halot, but I don't have the money, so I use Brown Driver Briggs as well as other resources. But Strong's, I'm just showing you because it's easy to demonstrate it on the screen and show you on the screen. We could go straight to the Hebrew if you want there and do the same thing. It's just most of you don't realize, it's a little bit more difficult. So dealing with Strong's, only use this for very basic stuff. If you want to know what a lexicon says, get a lexicon. Strong's is not a lexicon. Strong's is just a dictionary concordance. That's all it is. Okay, the reason I say lexicon is because lexicon will actually take the verb form in its current contextual state, even with its suffixes and prefixes, and it would bring about a word that is contextually accurate in its definition, as opposed to just the general form of the word and its general definition, which is all Strong's can do. So anyhow, and all the families of, this is Eretz. Now, the reason I went through this is to show you that the promise in the days of Genesis, in the days of Abraham, is that all the earth, presumably, will be blessed. Here, I assume, it's also implying all the earth. Again, because it's talking about all the nations that have come up against you, so it's all nations, and these nations would be outside of the Eretz, so that by context and by implication would refer to earth. So that's why, and a lexicon would actually show you that, a dictionary would not. And it shall be, if any of the clans of the earth does not come up to Jerusalem to bow themselves to the sovereign King of Yehovah, on them there is to be no water, no rain. Now, there are other places in the text. Ezekiel has several. I want to say, oh goodness, is it Ezekiel 49? I didn't have it in front of me. I'm sorry. But that rivers of water will flow all throughout the earth. And that these rivers of water that flow will bring about an abundance of food, and no one will need to fight for food. No one will have to work for food. No one will have to work for anything in order to survive. the ground itself will bring about its bounty without any effort from humanity. And that this is the blessing. Those that come and bow will receive rain. Those that do not come up and bow shall not receive rain. That's the blessing that comes upon all nations of the earth. Notice that it says, if anyone of the clans of the earth, this is the same thing we're talking about back in the original, back in the first text in Genesis. All the clans of the earth will find blessing through you. So, what promise is being made to Abraham here? It promises that through your seed, Abraham, Jesus is coming to save the world of their sins. The world does not have sins that have an atonement vehicle, a mechanism of atonement. We just discussed that in chapter 9. There's 3 laws. None of them have any mechanisms for atonement identified. No one knows how to atone for those sins. But this is the atonement, Jeff. Where does it say in here that this is the atonement for the Torah that was given to Noah? It doesn't say it anywhere. So you want to assume it? Fine. Nothing wrong with your assumption. It's a free world. But this is not what it said. It says that all the earth will be blessed or find blessing through you. The prophet that we went to, Zechariah, identifies that blessing to be in the form of life, water, fruits, vegetables, the soil that brings about its bounty. For the first time since the garden, as a matter of fact, one of the promises through the prophets is that that Eden shall that Israel shall become as the garden in the midst of the earth. That garden being Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, and that for the first time since Adam and Eve, we see that the earth itself will begin to flower on its own and fruit on its own and bring forth its bounty on its own. That's the blessing that is given here. Jeff, it doesn't say that. You're right. It doesn't say that. What it does say is that there's a blessing coming, and it doesn't identify what it is. I can tell you that later on, the prophets identify that blessing as being through the restoration of the Garden of Eden for all the earth. That's what the prophets say. I can tell you that even later on, we see that these guys that come along that start talking about this whole new concept, this whole new testament, that they bring about a whole new blessing. That blessing involves everlasting life. That blessing involves escaping hell and damnation. That blessing involves going to live in heaven and becoming higher than the angels. But those things were never, ever, ever mentioned in Torah as being a penalty or a blessing. So to bring them up and say that they are the blessing that God is going to bring upon all the earth is completely out of context. However, the restoration of the Garden of Eden is in context. So which do you choose to believe? It's free world. Whichever one you choose to believe is fine. As long as you're good to other people and you take care of other people and you are, you respect life in general, and that's all that's really required of us. Don't kill, don't eat the blood, but you can eat anything you want other than the blood. That's all that's required of the nations. So the nations don't have sin unless they've eaten blood. The nations don't have sin unless they've taken the life of a human. They don't have sin unless they do those things or unless they curse Israel. But there's no mechanism for atonement identified. There is no expectation for atonement, nor is there really an identification of what the penalty is. So to say that the blessing that is given to Abraham is Jesus and his salvation from of the earth from sin, you have to justify the sin part, because right now the Torah doesn't define it that way, in no way. So which one is more reasonable? The restoration of the Garden of Eden being the blessing, or Jesus being the blessing? Well, to me, it's the restoration of the Garden of Eden because of what the prophets say. But it doesn't matter which way it is, it's going to happen. One way or another, it's going to happen, and what it is contextually is not identified within this section of text specifically. And that's what's more important than me adding things from other parts of the Bibles or books. Okay, so then we see Abraham pass through the land as far as the place of Shechem and as far as the oaks of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. Now this is an interesting statement. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. If you go and look at some other texts, let's go ahead and bring up our handy dandy here. Let's see. There we are. And they came to land. Yeah, okay. So, set out for the land of Canaan. They came to the land of Canaan. Abraham passed the land of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. And it appeared that to Abraham, and he said, "To your seed I give this land." And he built there a slaughtering site to Jehovah, who had appeared to him. And from there he moved on to Bethel. And from Bethel went to Ai, and he built a slaughter site there and called upon the name of Jehovah. So multiple slaughter sites coming up. If Abraham knew God's Torah, then he should have only built a slaughter site in Shechem, or in Gerizim and Eval, which is near Shechem. Basically, he should have built it at Shiloh. But anyhow, so then Abraham flies. He takes a journey down to Egypt and goes to Egypt, and then passes back from Egypt back up to the land. Now let's get back to our other. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, as far as the place where his tent had been at the first, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the slaughter site we had made there at the beginning. There Abraham called out the name of Jehovah. So here we see Abraham has come into the land. He builds his first slaughter sites, and from there he goes down to Egypt. When he comes back from Egypt, Lot is with him again. He goes back to the same place, and now Lot leaves him. Once Lot leaves him, Abraham lifts up his eyes and goes up another place and builds another slaughter site, and in Mamre. This is where he stays for quite some time. And by the way, this is where Caleb. This is where Caleb winds up getting land, which is also a wonderful story. So, it says here, lift up your eyes, see from the place where you are, to the north, to the south, Negev is south, to the east, Kedim, and then to the sea. Now, how far can he see? The average person can see 18 miles, depending on how high they are, and how the topology is around them. Generally, on the ocean, you see 18 miles. If you can see if you see the mast of a sailing ship on the horizon, and all you can see is the mast, you can gauge between 15 and 20 miles, and that's how the curvature of the Earth sits. So how far did Abraham see? Is the land of Israel 18 miles in a giant circle? Well, no. Again, it seems to be that the land that's given to him is supposed to be everything up to the mountain ranges within the region. It most definitely is not limited to the land that Moses gave. But it seems to be that it's that as far as the way it's written, you could say that it is only a portion of what Moses gave was actually given by God. Most people will assume that this covers quite a bit much larger area, including the area that Shem dwelt in, and that the entire area that Shem dwelt in, which was east towards the mountains, that entire land is included as well, and that seems to be what fits within most of the storyline. But moving on, we want to get down to this one stop in the middle before I get to the next covenant. We see that Melchizedek, this is a very big issue within Christianity. Melchizedek, as to some people, is Melchizedek, righteous king, king of Shalem, which, by the way, were in the times of David. They weren't anybody who worshipped God. So is this Shalem the same Shalem that David went and took through the spring of Gihon up in the mountains, which became Jerusalem? or is this Shechem? I was speaking with Yoel Halavi, a great guy. If you haven't heard of him or haven't done any of his studies, he's got great studies on YouTube and on his website, Hebrew in Israel. But anyhow, he postulated, he didn't say that it absolutely was, but he postulated that this word is maybe Shechem, not Shalem. And that this would make sense to me because Shalem doesn't seem to be a place that righteous king would have lived, because in the days of David, there was nobody there that David seemed to be righteous. David thought was righteous. But what is said here is that Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and that has developed into a really big, really detailed and important, foundationally important doctrine within Christianity. But I'd like to read it again just using basic English. So in basic English, we have two people here. Two people that are primarily being referred to. The third entity would be God. It says, now Melchizedek, king of Shalem, brought out bread and wine, for he, Melchizedek, was priest of God Most High. Or is this he, being Abraham, was priest of God Most High? Doesn't say. But within the English, it could be either one. But he gave him a blessing and said, blessed be Abraham. So the rest of this sentence here identifies this he as Melchizedek. So Melchizedek, he gave him, who is the him? Abraham, blessing. So Melchizedek, he gave him, Abraham, blessing, and blessed be the Most High God who delivered your oppressors into your hand. So the he is saying your oppressors. Let's go back to my handy dandy little magnifying glass. I like that little magnifying glass, although for some reason it's slow today. So him, Most High God delivered your oppressors into your hand. So whose hand were the oppressors delivered into? Abraham, right? So, back again. He delivered your oppressors. So he, Melchizedek, blessed Abraham and said, blessed be God who has delivered Abraham's oppressors into Abraham's hand. And he, who is he? Who is the he who gave him a tenth of everything? Could it be that it completely reverses now? And the he is Abraham? And the him is Melchizedek? Well, for me, it doesn't make sense to do that in the middle of the flow, nor even at the end of the flow. Not without clear contextual adjustment or transition. And there's no transition. So, since there is no transition implied, then I would strongly urge all of you to read it the way it is written here. And it says, Melchizedek gave Abraham a tenth of everything. Some people might find that highly problematic. But again, reading it as an English text, because we're reading it in English, in the English text, and every single translation breaks it down exactly the same. There's no change, no adjustment in any of the translations. It always has the same flow of he and him and your. So the he and the him are consistent in every translation. And that, to me, is an example of what people would call Dunning-Kruger syndrome, where you're being stared at in the face with fact, but you don't see the fact, you see the opposite of the fact. And this is the example. So who is the he? Throughout the whole storyline, the he is blessing him. The he who gave him a tenth of everything is Melchizedek, gave Abraham tithes, not the other way around. So, let that stew for a moment. Now we have another comment between God and Abraham. This other comment is still tied to the original comments. I shall make you a great nation, and the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That's the first one. Great nation, nations of the earth to be blessed. He brought him outside and said, pray, look towards the heavens, count the stars. Can you count them? He said, so shall your seed be. A great nation. And he trusted Jehovah, and he deemed as righteous merit on his part because he trusted God. And he said to him, I am Jehovah, brought you out of the Ur of Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it. And what did he say? He says, how am I going to inherit it? I don't have a child. So Jehovah said, do something. Go fetch go fetch calf, go fetch goat, go fetch ram, go fetch turtle dove, and fetch those things. Divide them all except for the birds, put them out, and I'm going to show you my covenant. So then it came dark, the sun was gone in, the deep slumber fell upon Avram, and he said, and here fright and great darkness falling upon him, and he said to Abraham, you must know, yes, know, that your seed will be sojourners in a land not theirs, and they will be put them to servitude and afflict them for 400 years. But the nation to which they are in servitude, I will bring judgment on them, and after that they will go out with great wealth. As for you, you will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. But in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite has not yet reached full measure heretofore. And on that day Jehovah cut a covenant with Abraham, saying, I give this land to your seed, from the river of Euphrates, from the great river to the great river of Euphrates, the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaites, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite, their lands. So, what is the covenant of the cut pieces about? I shall make you a great nation. I'm going to make your children go into a place of great servitude, and they will come out with great wealth. And I will give them this land. I give this land to your seed. So what is the covenant of the cut pieces, folks? Great nation, great land. Okay? So the first covenant God gave to Abraham was for him having a great nation that follows through his seed. The second covenant here, directly related to the first, identifies not only a seed, but also a place. So now we have a people and a place in the covenant of Abraham that has been identified. Now the rest of the discussion is about who's going to be the seed. Sarah's wife had not borne him any children. She had an Egyptian handmaid, and her name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, now here, Jehovah has obstructed me from bearing. Pray, come in to my maid. Perhaps I may be built up with sons through her. And Abraham said, sure, why not? So that's what starts all this. Abraham goes and begins the process with Sarai. Sarai has a son. Sarai can't have a son, so she goes to Hagar. Then he goes to Hagar, and Hagar gives him a son. And then there's problems between Hagar and it just doesn't get better. So what happens? Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abraham called the name of the son she bore Ishmael. Now, when Abraham was 90 years and 9 years old, Jehovah was seen by Abraham and said to him, I am El Shaddai, walk in my presence and be wholehearted. I set my covenant between me and you. I will make you exceedingly, exceedingly many. And Abraham fell upon his face. So God introduces himself to Abraham once again. And what does he do? He repeats the first covenant. I'm going to make you a great nation. He repeats the second covenant. But not really second covenant. It's just like a building up to the covenant being completely identified to him. That's a people and a place. And then when we get to Moses, the people and the place, which are already identified because of these texts here, now are given rules in order to remain. They have the right to live there, but they have to, in order to remain, they have to be faithful. They have to be righteous, as Abraham was, by following God's commands in the land which I give them. But as for me here, my covenant is with you, so that you will become the father of a throng of nations, throng of clans, 12 tribes. No longer shall your name be called Avram, rather your name shall be Avraham, for I will make you Av Hamon Goyim, the father of a group or a clan of nations, or a throng of nations. I will cause you to bear fruit exceedingly, exceedingly. I will make nations of you. Yes, kings will go out from you. 12 tribes, 12 kings. That's one way to view it. You could say that the exile does this. You could say a lot of things about this. However, I establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their great generations as a covenant for the ages, to be a God to you and to your seed after you. What's the covenant? The people and the place. No hell, no heaven, no eternal life, no eternal death. It's a people and a place. Anybody who goes and adds additional context to this by saying eternal life, eternal death, heaven, hell, sin, atonement, none of those are identified here. The only thing that are identified 3 times so far in 3 different sections of this text, it's a people and a place. It says, I will give this land to you. I will give to you and to your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, as a holding for all ages, and I will be a God to them. As for you are to keep my covenant, you and your seed after you, throughout your generations. This is my covenant you are to keep. So, what is the promise? The promise is, I shall make you a mighty nation. A group of nations shall even come from you, or a group of clans or peoples should come from you, and there will be many kings. There were 12 tribes, and each one had a leader, a king, and that somewhat addresses this. May not be completely, but it's a people and a place, and that's the covenant that God made with Abraham. Now, Abraham is told in order to keep his covenant, he has to do something physically. This is my covenant which you are to keep. There's nothing to keep up here. God said, this is what I'm going to do for you. That's why he walked through the cut pieces up here, because he alone is keeping this covenant. I've heard Christians say, well, because the people failed the Abrahamic covenant and were removed from the land, then God had to die, because he made a covenant with himself that so shall I be these cut pieces if I fail you in the covenant. But there's nothing in the text for that. All it says is God will make this happen and it will not be undone. That's all the covenant of the cut pieces says. But when you get down here, there is something, not the same covenant. This is not necessarily a covenant. This is a commandment you are to keep. You are to keep this covenant. It is the word covenant, but it's a commandment. The commandment is for him, they have to be circumcised. And those who are not circumcised are not part of this promise. So in order for you to be a part of this promise, you have to be circumcised. Now again, you have Christianity that comes along and says, oh, I can make children of Abraham from these very stones. You don't need to be circumcised of the flesh. You need to be circumcised of the heart. Well, again, this text says you are going to be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. And it's a sign of the covenant between me and you. You want to come down later and say, well, no, it's not that, it's this. Then you're just taking a risk whether or not you've chosen the right one. Me, I go with the original. You want to go to the secondhand news? That's fine. But it says here you have to circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. Then it goes on to give you examples of how to do it. And then he goes on, now God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, for Sarah is her name, princess. And I will bless her, and I will give you a son from her. So we had the problem. Up until this point, he started out talking about Eleazar, said, this is my servant of my house. I trust him with my life. He is my son. Let Eleazar go before me as my seed. God says, no, it's going to be of your flesh. Hagar comes on the scene. He has Ishmael, and he wants to present Ishmael. Matter of fact, it says right here, Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live in your presence. I'm 100-year-old. How am I going to have a kid? So the first one, Eleazar. Second one, Ishmael. So next week, when we get to Moreh, when we get to the mountain where where Abraham takes Isaac and Abraham, and there's Isaac on the altar. The reason for that is found in what we're talking about right here. 3 times, or 2 times up to this point, Abraham has tried to use someone else than what God wanted, and 3 times God has told him that it was going to be of Abraham's seed. And only here at the last point does he identify to Abraham specifically, it's going to be Sarah and your seed, not just your seed. And that you shall call his name Yitzhak, for he laughs, and I will establish my covenant with him as a covenant for all the ages, for his seed after him. So that's where we are to this point. The storyline is, Abraham, I'm choosing you. Abraham, I'm blessing you. Abraham, I will extend these blessings to your seed, and not just to whom you choose, Abraham, but to whom I have chosen, and that'll be through Sarah. So when we get to the altar next week, where Isaac is laying it flat out, waiting to be done in, what is the purpose of that test? Oh, it's to show that God's going to lay down his firstborn son, that all the world shall be saved. There's no indictment against the whole world that needs to be saved from. The only people who sin in the Torah are those who have been given direct instructions and mechanisms for atonement if they refuse or are not able to participate or fulfill those instructions. No such thing given to all the world. So, can it be that all the world is going to be saved because God gave us an example of God and Jesus through Isaac and Abraham? No. God is trying to show Abraham it's through this son. Now, do you believe me or not? Because he's already tried to do Eleazar, he's tried to do Ishmael, and then even after God said it's going to be through Sarah, he says, no, take Ishmael. So this is a test for Abraham. Next week when we talk about it, I will be going back over it again. It is a test for Abraham. It has nothing to do with eternal life, eternal death, atonement, mechanisms for atonement, heaven, hell. It doesn't, none of that. It's about Abraham getting it right. So that leads us up to this point, and we are now opening. We have now opened the relevant portion of our Bible. What we are dwelling in, what we are working from. Because from this, we see Yitzhak is going to be chosen. From Yitzhak, it's going to be Jacob that's chosen. From Yaakov is chosen the 12 sons. Then we go off and we fulfill the 400 years or the 4 generations, whichever it happens to be, of this time of servitude or being inside of another nation and then coming out with great wealth. That is where the storyline begins. And for us, that is where the Torah, the relevant Torah, begins. Because so far up to this point, each of these people that were given Torah, it was for them alone, except for Noah. But everything that was given to Abraham, everything that was given to Yitzhak, everything that was given to Yaakov, everything that was given to Lot or to Ever or to Peleg or anybody else, all those were specifically for them to do. Go build an ark. Well, the way Christianity approaches the text, we should all be building boats. Because it says that Noah's supposed to build an ark, then we all have to build an ark. However, once we get to Abraham, we have now we now start to identify specific people groups that are divided outside of the world, outside of the general population. And these specific people groups are unique in that the nations will look upon them either in blessings and cursings, so now they are unique and equal to other nations, and that this nation also now has land, and this land is going to be protected with God's presence if you obey. And that's where we start to move into the Torah of the land of Israel, which all of Christianity is built off of as being applicable to the entire world, which is not. It's applicable to a single group of people taken out of the midst of the world. The Kodesh people, the holy people, the set-apart people, set apart from the general population. The rules that are given to this set-apart people, just like in the days of Abraham, you go here, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. But only until we get to circumcision is it that you and your children after you will do this. But only you and your children after you, not all the world. So we begin the distinction between this people and the global population in Abraham, and that distinction remains all the way through the remainder of Torah. That the only time the nations are ever required to obey any of these commands is if they live in the people. It says right here, 8 days old, every male among you shall be circumcised throughout your generations, whether house-born or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your seed. Even in the days of Abraham, the commandment was only applicable to the foreigner, to those who were not of this set-apart group, if they were in the set-apart group. Yes, circumcised shall your house-born or your money-bought slaves, so that my covenant may be in your flesh as a covenant throughout the ages. It's going to be, from this time on, Israel, the world. The world is not given the 10 commandments. The world is not given the 603 other commandments. The world is not given penalties and blessings for obedience. The world, except for the one command, cursings and blessings of Israel. That's the only time we have any kind of cursings and blessing promises to the world. Outside of that, the only people who are identified with blessings and cursings are those that are uniquely and specifically spoken to by God or included in a covenant by God, and the general population of the world is not included from this point on. So, for Christianity or Islam or anybody else that wants to go and impose the Torah, the commandments given from Abraham all the way down through the end of Moses, anyone who wants to impose these commands and these laws onto anyone other than Israel does so in an extra biblical fashion with no textual support within the text itself. Okay, so I think that covers everything I wanted to cover here. I think we are doing good on time. Oh, wow. I did that in an hour. Yeah, wow. You might have to go back and listen to it a couple times. If I missed something, then I apologize. Shoot me a message or make a comment on the YouTube there, and I will try to answer anything I can. If there's enough, people who have specific things that I haven't covered before, feel free to shoot me a message or say something on the YouTube or on our Facebook page or whatever, or in the chat room that we have, and then I'll make a video just for those topics. So I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to find any questions you may have. Okay, let's see. Wes is busy typing. Yes, Strong's is weak. Okay, so I'm going to put myself on dark for a second so that I can drink some water. And I'll give you guys about a minute or so, and I'll come back up, and hopefully you have your questions ready. Okay, so be right back. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet. I'm just popping into YouTube on the other browser so I can actually go in and see any questions there, because I forgot I wasn't logged on there. Ah, now we're on. Okay. Okay, so justified killings versus okay, so let's look at it this way. If we look at let's go back up to... Now, this is going to be an example of using outside information to give an answer. The text doesn't identify what's actually being said, but I will demand it from humankind. There is a reasoning within Judaism. By the way, I did pull my hair up. It was getting hot. Long hair is great for the winter. It says, flesh, it's blood you're not to eat. Your blood for your lives. I will demand satisfaction from all wild animals. I will demand it from humankind, every man regarding his brother, demanding satisfaction for human life. It is assumed within Judaism that in order for this to be accomplished, humanity must, as a response to this, form governments to judge against death. But the governments really, it seems to be, its only response, as far as what the text is identifying, is to keep people from murdering people indiscriminately, and we are to demand satisfaction for that human life ourselves, and if we don't, then God will demand it of us. The Jewish perspective of this is that God would judge humanity. And the reason we have this perspective is because of the flood story. Because in the flood story, we had a lot of things that was going on. We don't have exact information, but the information seems to be that they became bloodthirsty murderers. And that it wasn't being addressed by ourselves, by humanity. We weren't controlling ourselves. So the Jewish perspective is that we are required as humanity to judge our own brothers when they kill another one of us. And that if we don't, then God will require it not only of the person, but also of the society that that person lives that allowed it to happen. That is the Jewish perspective. I lean towards that perspective because it makes sense. However, the text itself doesn't identify. So the question that was asked about justified killing versus unjustified killing, that's something that only can be identified by a judge. Either God doing it or humanity doing it. What is a justified killing and what is an unjustified killing? It doesn't say. It just says here, anybody who sheds another man's blood. It doesn't say justified or not. The justification comes through some kind of human intervention and judging/government. So such a question about whether it's justified killing or unjustified killing follows the Jewish perspective. Because now you have somebody that's already identified it as justified or unjustified. And the only way that can be done is through human interaction. Because God only tells us, don't kill. If someone kills, we're not even supposed to kill them. God is going to do that. That's what it says in the text. So the question about justified versus unjustified actually has an existing presupposition that has to be addressed, and that is who's making that judgment. Making that statement about justification, there are several places, and I would like you guys to at least have this in your, written down somewhere. Logical fallacies. There's a term called logical fallacy. Anytime you have a discussion, argument, debate, whatever it is you want to call it, between two people, you must follow specific guidelines in order to maintain a reasonable logical flow throughout the discussion. Don't attack the person, ad hominem. Don't take a little bit of information that someone says and turn it into an absurd extension of that, ad absurdum. And these things, it gives you, it's a very nice, gives structure to how you want to formulate your opinion and how you want to demonstrate your opinion. So I would strongly advise any of you who have not, please look up logical fallacies and familiarize yourself with it, especially if you have had difficulty expressing yourself to me in the past, because I will say, you can't say that. That's that's ad absurdum, or that's ad hominem, or if that's straw man. Straw man is, for example, if I say to you, because all cows pass gas, cows are the reason for global warming. That's a straw man, because you've made a leap of faith from one thing to another and tried to tie them together through almost what you would say ad absurdum. So keep an eye on that. That would be something I think everybody could benefit from. I just put my hair back in a man bun. Not a very good question, mind you, but Wade. Okay. The comment is, there are a lot of soldiers that have problems with the idea of killing, which is why the question was brought up. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, to thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land where my mothers cried, land where my brothers will die in the future. It's, we are a bloodthirsty people. America, the land of the free, the home of the insanely murderous. Every people on the earth have been insanely murderous. Look in the last 150 years at how many people have died at the hands of the United States through either proactive or reactive war. But it says here, anyone who kills another man, I will demand satisfaction for that death or that human life that was killed. That's all it says. So does that give a person right? I mean, does it work when you say to God, I was just following orders? I don't know. I now am a conscientious objector. However, if someone is fixing to kill someone who I love, I would probably wind up breaking this commandment and hope to God that I would not be judged for it because I was saving a life. But it doesn't allow for that in the text. It says don't kill. If someone kills your brother, you're not allowed to kill him back. Then we get to the Torah, where within Israel, in the land of Israel, we have commandments that allow for that. So in Israel, in the land that Moses defines and within the Torah that Moses defines, we do see those commands, and we do see them very well written out with very finite structure in the government perspective of how to handle it. But in this text, we do not. This text deals with the whole world. This is the only thing that somebody who's not a member of Israel, a member of that covenant, who entered into it the way that God defines in the text of the covenant, circumcision, Passover, then you're not a member, and this is the only thing that applies to you. Nothing else applies to you unless you're a member of that covenant. And in this covenant, even if somebody kills your brother, the way it's written, you're not allowed to kill him back. Oh man. Okay. So over the next couple weeks, we'll be working towards their time in Egypt, and we'll be getting done with Joseph here relatively soon. Another 3-4 weeks, and then we'll get into the actual establishment of the covenant. Once that happens, then we'll have all of the meat and all of the vegetables that we need in order to have a full meal, a full explanation of how to operate within the land, what is required and what is not required within the land, and we will still see at that time no indication whatsoever of a commandment that goes out beyond what is spoken of here in Genesis chapter 9 to anyone outside of Israel. So, there are 2 commandments to the world. One is to Israel, one is to the whole world. And there are 2 different commands, and they don't overlap so much. Okay, so with that being said, folks, hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If there are any questions, feel free to get hold of us. The chat room is a great place to go to. It's on Discord. And if you have any questions, you can check on there. You can actually copy and paste the Discord link from the information down below. And I just realized that it's covered here on the screen a little bit, but I'll fix that next week. And I want to thank you guys. Really is enjoyable having you guys here. And I'm really sorry about last week, but it's been crazy busy. And next week should be okay. We'll see. We're bringing fiber into our network, and sometime over the next couple days, as soon as that gets turned on, I'm going to be going into crazy man mode just so I can get done by Sabbath. So you guys keep me in your thoughts so that I can be here on Sabbath. It'd be wonderful. And we'll pick it up with Abraham again. And we'll get into the rest of the story, as it were. So that being said, Shabbat Shalom, you guys. Shavua Tov. And any questions, please feel free to contact us. Hasta luego.